Baseball Tonight, the podcast.
Thanks for listening. I'm Buster Olney, and this is the Baseball Tonight podcast for Friday, June 13th. Josh, are you superstitious? Does this day make you nervous?
I'm not. I don't consider myself a superstitious person, Buster. I remember earlier in the season when you were doing the podcast from the 13th floor of a hotel, which was labeled the 14th, and that freaked me out a little bit, especially since we had some connectivity issues that day, and something just didn't feel right. Now it's Friday the 13th. I don't know. Hopefully we put a good show together today. That's all I'll say.
Okay. It doesn't bother me at all. It's just another day. On this date in baseball history, in 1957, Red Sox outfielder Ted Williams became the first American leaguer to hit two three-run homer games in one season. The Splendid Splinter drove in 5 runs, helping Boston to defeat the Indians 9-3. And today we'll be talking with Ted Williams' daughter, Claudia, about her new book about her father. The Fireball Expressive Justin Havens and Karl Ravech will tell you whether they'd pick Jeff Samardzija or David Price from the trade market. And Tim Hudson was unbelievable on Thursday. Let's get to the headlines.
The first pitch.
As our old friend Dan Patrick might say, you can't stop the Houston Astros. You can only hope to contain them. They just keep on winning. They're within 6 games of 500 after they walked it off against the Arizona Diamondbacks last night, winning 5-4. Chris Carter hit the walk-off home run, and afterward, Bo Porter talked about that.
Did you feel good when Carter came up in that spot, considering how well he's been swinging the bat?
Well, we found out again tonight why we keep running them out there, and we know he can change the game with one swing, and now we know he can end the game with one swing.
The Detroit Tigers shut out the Chicago White Sox, or more specifically, Max Scherzer did, throwing his first complete game of his career. We'll be talking with Justin Havens and Karl Ravech about that. Brad Ausmus talked with reporters about Scherzer's effort.
That was a big pickup. Max obviously was outstanding. He did exactly what we needed. He went up against one of the best pitchers in the game and held on for 9. So we can't ask for anything more out of him.
Considering the way things are going, to get a complete game out of Max to pitch the way he did, I mean, that's what the doctor ordered, isn't it?
It is, and that's we got some of the guys that are capable of going deep into games. It hasn't worked out that way necessarily the last 3 weeks, but we got guys who can go deep into games. But that was huge. It really was.
When he got on that roll like that, did you think there was a chance that he would be able to complete this game tonight, or was there any question in your mind that he may have to go to the bullpen?
Well, I mean, there's always a chance. You never know what's going to happen. But oddly enough, he had that quick first inning, and I was thinking, geez, maybe Max can get his first complete game ever. That was kind of crossed my mind. But things can change. But yeah, he did. He did, and he had probably a little bit of room before he hit the ceiling.
San Francisco Giants salvaged the final game of a 4-game set with the Washington Nationals, beating Washington 7-1. After the game, Bruce Bochy talked about Hector Sanchez.
He's a good hitter. He's put together some good years. I think with him, it's a matter of staying healthy. You like him coming off the bench. He gives you good defense, too. He's a good base runner. And so he's made us a better club. He's given us more depth and more options. But he's always a threat up there, and that's a good thing.
The real star of the game for the Giants was actually Tim Hudson. He was absolutely dominant. We'll be talking about him with Justin and Karl coming up. Dodger shortstop Hanley Ramirez got a cortisone shot in his right shoulder. He was unavailable for a couple of games. They're hoping that he'll be back sometime this weekend. He's dealing with inflammation in the AC joint. Obviously a big issue for Hanley because he's a free agent when the year is over. Jacoby Ellsbury expects to play Friday after hurting his hip Thursday night. Ellsbury got the Yankees started as they finished the sweep of the Mariners with an early home run. Gio Gonzalez made his second rehab start. He says he's ready to rejoin the Nationals. We'll see how that goes. Gerald Laird is okay after being hit in the head during Thursday's game against the Colorado Rockies. Actually was dinged by a backswing that led to a bench-clearing incident because after Laird was taken off the field and when he was hit by that backswing, David Carpenter threw his next pitch into the hip of the hitter who had hit Laird. He was ejected. Walt Weiss, the Rockies manager, was really upset with how this played out. He wound up being ejected. There was the retaliation later in the game. It was crazy. I would encourage you to go on MLB.com and look for video of what played out in the course of that game. Neil Walker was sore when he rejoined the Pirates, but he says that he feels like he's making progress as he comes back from his emergency appendectomy. Look, these days it usually takes about 2 to 3 weeks for players to come back from that. Now, before we bring in the Fireball Express, I want to tell you about Audible, an audio book downloading service. They've got over 150,000 titles to choose from, fiction, nonfiction, bestsellers, every category imaginable. They have free apps for iPhones, Android, and Windows Phone. You can download on your iPhone, iPod, Android, Kindle Fire, Windows Phone, and over 500 MP3 players. Unlike a streaming or rental service, with Audible, you actually own your own books. The My Library feature lets you access your books anytime, even from your phone. WhisperSync for Voice lets you switch back and forth between your Kindle and audiobook without ever losing your place or missing a word. Immersion reading on Kindle Fire HD lets you listen and read at the same time and highlights the text as you read along with the narrator. It's got chapter navigation, annotated, bookmarks, sleep mode, button-free mode. You can even control how quickly or how slowly it's narrated. Why would you want to try Audible? Well, you get a free audiobook of your choice and a free 30-day trial membership. So why wouldn't you? With Audible's great listen guarantee, you cannot go wrong. Here's how it works. If you decide you don't like the book you choose, no worries. You can exchange any book you aren't happy with for another title. Anytime, no questions asked. Audible is offering our listeners a free audiobook of your choice and a free 30-day trial membership. Just go to audible.com/BBTN. That's short for Baseball Tonight. Audible.com/BBTN and choose from over 150,000 titles. Download a title free and start to listen right now. It's that easy. Go to audible.com/BBTN. That's audible.com/BBTN and get started today.
It's the Fireball Express with Karl Ravech and Justin Havens on Baseball Tonight.
Karl is, of course, the host of Baseball Tonight. Justin Havens is the host of the nerd version of Baseball Tonight on Thursdays at 10 o'clock on ESPN, and he is the master of research. And, guys, the last time I saw you was about an hour after a Sunday night baseball game over the weekend between the Tigers and the Red Sox in Detroit. And you guys asked me to stay up, but I said, nah, I got to get up at 5 o'clock. I have too much work to do. I felt like a nerd. What was the aftermath of that, Karl?
Well, we were intense. Barry Larkin, Havens, me, a couple of other folks from the Baseball Tonight side, and very passionate discussions, I think Justin would acknowledge, around baseball and other subjects, which led to a very late night. And we were scheduled to get up at 6:45 the next day, meet Havens in the lobby, and he was scheduled to drive us to the airport. And needless to say, the discussion and the intensity of those discussions led for some reason to Justin not being able to. I think it was Dave Campbell who always said, "Go to the post." Remember, Dave Campbell worked with us on Baseball Tonight, Buster, and
oh, yeah.
He would always refer to pitchers who would go to the post, meaning there was not a start they would miss. You could count on them religiously. And as we sort of, delve into this Fireball Express edition, we're going to start talking about some of these pitchers who just go to the post. They're always there. Havens didn't go to the post. It was something was amiss. It may very well have been something he ate or drank the night before, but he was down for the count. He was not feeling well, and Larkin and I were left to kind of take him under our wing and be the veterans that we are and say, look, little guy, when you have to get up at 6:45, no matter how tired you are, you got to get up. So he got up, he played through it, probably learned from his from his prior night activities not to delve too deep into these serious conversations about baseball and other things. And when the clock says it's time to go to bed, it's time to go to bed. And to his credit, he was up the next day and he was working the next night without any fall off whatsoever.
Justin, defend yourself.
No, there is no defense. In fact, I appreciated Ravi and Larkin's leadership, and it certainly was a learning experience for me. And while Monday will not go down as one of my finest days, but we've made it through, and like most struggles, we're better off for it now.
Hey, Buster,
it really
just
sounds
one other
like
quick part of that story, Buster. This is sort of the part where you read about things that aren't said during the podcast, but I do want to let everybody know, while Havens is quick to give Larkin credit for this, as much as he's a Hall of Famer on the field and even off the field, he's a terrific guy. When we were in the lobby waiting for Havens at 6:45, I looked at Barry and said, "What do we do?" And he said, "We go to the airport." I said, "Wait a minute, we got to go make sure he's okay. Let's wake him up." So your buddy there, the Hall of Famer, I'm not throwing him under the bus, but I'm throwing him under the Fireball Express here. He was ready to just abandon ship, and I said, "Nope, we got to go make sure that our boy's okay, because we would suffer on Monday night without Havens." So let's just put the Hall of Famer in his place on this one, and I guarantee if you ask him, he would confirm that Ravech led the charge to get Havens to the airport, and Larkin was ready to just jump ship and leave the kid there.
It sounds like life within the Baltimore Orioles organization to me. I was going to say, it sounds like the life within the Orioles organization to me. It was like Manny Machado had a bad weekend. The veterans came to him. They told him what they thought. But, of course, if he doesn't get better, they're going to throw him overboard.
Exactly.
Let's get to baseball, guys. Yesterday, Tim Hudson with a phenomenal outing against the Nationals. And, guys, he's one of my favorite pitchers to watch because I always wonder what it is that the hitters are looking at. It always seems like every pitch he throws is right at the knees, that they're only seeing the absolute top of the baseball, and there's not much you can do about it. And, guys, as we wake up today, and Justin will ask you first, he leads all of Major League Baseball in ERA. He's a month and a day from his 39th birthday, and you start to wonder, is Tim Hudson now going beyond being in the conversation for the Hall of Fame? Is he a Hall of Famer?
In my opinion, I would say no. And I think that has as much to do with him as it does the ridiculous log jam in front of him. He's 30th among pitchers in WAR in the expansion era, alongside guys like Chuck Finley, and I think a guy that we could have a similar conversation about in Mark Burley. And it's sort of, if Hudson, then you have to also, I think, in my opinion, consider Burley, Andy Pettitte statistically. I mean, we've got Roy Halladay, who's going to be on the ballot here pretty soon. And I'm going to hijack this for just 1 second to make the case for somebody who received 29% of the vote last year, which is our colleague Curt Schilling. Tim Hudson had 3 seasons in which he was one of the 10 best pitchers, according to WAR, 2002, 2003, and 2010. Schilling has had 7 of those seasons, including a peak with 6 of them from 97 to 04. He has nearly 3 times as many 5 WAR seasons as Hudson, and just registered 29% of the vote. And with all due respect to Tim Hudson, there are bigger priorities for the Hall of Fame than him.
Well, and I'll make the defense of that first. I didn't vote for Schilling. It's not because I don't think he's a Hall of Famer. I think that Schill's 29% is related in part to the limited 10 on the Hall of Fame ballot. I know a lot of other voters who are having the same problem, that because you had to leave somebody off. My feeling was in Jack Morris's last year of eligibility, I was going to vote for him. I'll be making similar choices in years ahead unless they change the rules. I think Curt Schilling's a Hall of Famer. I just couldn't vote for him because I didn't have enough spots on my ballot. And so I left him off my ballot. I left Mike Messina off my ballot, who I covered, who I think is absolutely a Hall of Famer. And I'm hoping they change that. And there actually have been discussions between the baseball writers and the Hall of Fame about potential rule changes. So we'll see how that goes. Karl, what are you seeing in Tim Hudson?
Well, I'm seeing a guy who, who reminds me a little bit of Greg Maddux. And I agree with Justin, and I think Justin's point about there are bigger issues for the Hall of Fame than than whether Tim Hudson would be eligible to get in. And your point is the one I think he's probably referring to. But I see a guy who has been brought to an organization that seems to be in the middle of doing everything right. Michael Morse and now Tim Hudson. He is a very cerebral. He's really smart. He knows what he's doing. There's not a lot of ego out there that's going to cause him to try to blow away a guy. The cliche is he knows how to pitch. He knows how to pitch, and he knows how to win. He's as competitive as anybody. I remember seeing him at Walt Disney World, and he was doing something with the Harlem Globetrotters when he was playing with the Braves. And I think he was recovering. So rather than shoot a basketball, they had him bowl a basketball. And you could tell that there was no way he was going to go out there in front of this large crowd and embarrass himself. So he was practicing his bowling of a basketball. And there were certain guys, Smoltz is another one, who you look at and you just say to yourself, we will be a better team with a healthy X on it. And he is certainly that guy. And he fits that mold in that ballpark on that team as well as anybody. And you still look at that rotation, and if you go into a postseason series, I don't look at Tim Hudson, no matter what he's done, as the ace of the staff. As good as he's been so far, and hopefully that continues for him and the Giants. But when you think about other teams that are going to get into the postseason and the number ones that they're going to throw out there at you, and just use Kershaw, and just use Strasburg if you want. In the American League, it's similar in a way, and I know we're going to talk about him soon, Scherzer and Verlander, and I know Scherzer seems to be passing Justin, and he's having a bad year. But Tim Hudson, to me, is a guy that will be on a team that could win a World Series, and he'll be a big part of it, but he's not going to be the reason that they win the World Series. I don't think he's a Hall of Famer yet. I think he's as good a teammate and as good a piece on a team that wins a World Series as you can find. He's smart, he's competitive, he understands his body, he knows how to pitch, and in the National League, all that adds up to are wins and quality starts.
Well, and the other part about him is that he's such an underrated athlete. He was a terrific outfielder, hitter when he was in college at Auburn. He's an SEC guy, which means in my eyes he gets extra credit points. We'll get to that in a second. But it's funny you say that, Karl, because I would disagree with you in that I would feel very good if it's game one of a postseason. And he may not be that guy because they've got Madison Bumgarner. Maybe that's the way Bruce Bochy would go. I don't think that they would pick Matt Cain over Tim Hudson based on how the two pitchers are throwing. But I'd actually feel pretty good about Tim Hudson going up against an Adam Wainwright, a Clayton Kershaw, a Zach Greinke in a short series, a Steven Strasburg. You're not buying it quite the way I am?
My perception of Hudson, and Justin could eventually back it up or kind of dispute it, is that he's a great guy who will keep a game really close. But my perception of him in those games is he tends to be down 1-0 or 2-1 when he leaves. And usually the teams that are in these postseasons have really good bullpens, and those leads they tend to hold up. Now this year may be a little different. Maybe he is that guy, and maybe it's 0-0. Maybe his team is able to get to an Adam Wainwright. I just think about Tim Hudson, and again, this year may be an outlier because he's having such a great year. But I still think he's the guy that gives up that 2-run home run in the 5th inning or the 6th inning, and you're always like, oh, we should have pulled the ripcord a little bit earlier. I hope that changes. I'm a big fan of his, but that's my perception of him. And again, in time, if it's something that would be researched, I could be proven to be completely wrong. That's just my perception of him.
And, Justin, the way that Karl brought you up into that, the way he said, as Justin will back me up here, I almost got the sense that was an implied threat. Like he was saying, I'm going to reveal more about your issues with water in Detroit. Should you not back me up on this point right now, Justin?
Well, you guys can attribute it to whatever you want. I am going to back up Karl here. I'll throw out his relief appearance, obviously, in the postseason, and the game that he left after one inning back in 2003, and look at all of his other starts in which he actually pitched. And his teams are 2-6 in those games. So, you can say, I think it's largely attributable to the fact that he's been good, but not great in those starts, sort of the point that Karl was making. So I'm with Ravi on this one, and as you could probably tell from my comments earlier, as outstanding as he's pitching right now, and I would say the same about Burley, I'm not sure that I would be real excited about them starting game one either.
Guys, Max Scherzer continues to pitch well in a year in which he bet heavily on himself. Last night, his first career complete game, he lowered his ERA to 3.05 in his domination of the Chicago White Sox. So far this year, 106 strikeouts in 94 and a third innings, 8-2 record so far, 1.19 WHIP. Karl, you still thinking that this, in the end, is going to pay off for Max Scherzer, turning down 144 and going back into the market?
My sense on this may be very different than yours or everyone else's. The way I look at this Max Scherzer situation is there was he took out a big insurance policy on that offer. So Buster, the way I think about Max Scherzer is this: I don't look at Max Scherzer as betting on himself because, unbeknownst to me, whatever his financial situation is, I think Max Scherzer was in a position where he was comfortable enough to say, you know what, I believe in myself as a pitcher, as a human being. I have enough money I would assume, I'm making assumptions, I have enough money in the bank based on contracts that I've already pitched through to live 40 more lives if I wanted to. And I always look at guys like Scherzer, and as we watch the World Cup, Ronaldo, as we watch the U.S. Open, Mickelson, there are guys who are willing to do things that most of us would look at as somewhat unconventional. But they have achieved at the highest level against the highest competition. They are prepared for any test that's going to come their way. And while this may seem to the layman, the guy that's having a Budweiser in a bar here in Omaha for the College World Series, as crazy, stupid, makes no sense, to Max Scherzer, it makes great sense. There's really the risk in his world is so minimal to what we would perceive to be a risk not worth taking. When you find yourself prepared for an exam, it doesn't matter what the questions are, you're going to ace it. If you have to go run a marathon and you know you can do it, the only thing that's going to cause you to not be able to complete it is injury. The only bet that Max Scherzer hedges against himself is injury. And to be honest, I don't think he particularly is worried about it. If he were, he would have taken it. So if you take Max Scherzer at his healthiest, with his confidence, and as we saw last night, with a fastball, a slider, a changeup, and a curveball that shows up in the seventh inning, there is zero reason in his mind to believe that he's not going to win 18 to 21 games, and that the money is going to be there. It's a very easy mound for him to go take each and every time because he has the utmost confidence in his own abilities. The one caveat to all of that stuff for me is, while he turned that money down, how much more money is there going to be for a guy who now has thrown near 200 more innings on an arm? I think if you were to break it down from a front office perspective, his average annual value may go up, but the length of a deal, I would imagine, would probably be cut by a year. I think the risk in paying Max Scherzer will be greater after this year than it would have been coming into this year, because it's another full year of 200 plus innings, on an arm and a shoulder, and that's sort to me the risk. It's like, wait a minute, Max, that was great. You won 19 or 21, you won the Cy Young, but boy, 144 for X. I'll give you 25 to 30 a year for 3 years or 4 years. We can't go much more beyond that because you just pitched a whole another season. So those are my thoughts on Max Scherzer. I just don't think this is a big risk for him at all.
Well, and to your point, by the end of this year, he will have made about $30 million guaranteed in his career in salary. in addition to whatever insurance that he would gain if, in fact, he would be hurt. So that's how much money he has in the bank. I've likened this to someone playing a poker hand, that he's going to play it one way and maybe other people play it another way. But I will also tell you that over the weekend, as we were prepping for the Sunday night game, I had conversations with members of the Red Sox who are guys who already have a lot of money, and they think he's out of his mind. Because they were like, how do you turn down 144? And they echoed a lot of what you just said, Karl, that, hey, even if you have an unbelievable year, you win another Cy Young Award like you did last year, are you going to really get that much more? Let's say you get 160 million, 170. Is it worth gambling 144 to get that extra 15 or 25 million dollars? So even guys who've made a ton of money that I've spoken with are saying, what is he doing? But you know what? Max Scherzer's a smart guy. He knows what he wants to do, and it's his prerogative to make that decision. Justin, what are you seeing in Scherzer this year?
Yeah, I mean, I view this more as holding course. He's allowed, his ERA is higher. He's allowing a higher opponent's batting average. His walk rate is up. His strike rate is down. Now, some of these are very subtle changes, but, objectively, I think he's also going to have a hard time exceeding $144 million, or if he did, it's going to be by, as you guys have already alluded to, a margin that perhaps brings into question whether the risk was worth it. But, clearly he's established that last year is sort of his new level statistically, but I think everything that you guys said about just another year of pitching will certainly weigh on the minds of people issuing these contracts.
One of the conversations being had in front offices right now, guys, is the question of who would you rather have, Jeff Samardzija of the Chicago Cubs or David Price of the Tampa Bay Rays? Our friend Mark Topkin writes a story in the Tampa Bay Times this morning that the Rays now are beginning to be in that position of they're deciding when to trade from within their organization. And, of course, that involves David Price. We know the Cubs already have Jeff Samardzija out on the market. I've talked to some teams who say some of those conversations are beginning to gain traction. And what I'm hearing from evaluators is this, that, David Price is the more high-end guy. He certainly has the greater resume. He's a former Cy Young Award winner. On a given day when he's commanding his fastball, he's probably the better pitcher than Jeff Samardzija. On the other hand, in the last 2 days, I've talked with evaluators of some teams who are telling me, you know what, I love Samardzija's presence, that he's a guy who's got some cockiness, and you can see him being the leader of your staff. He's a former football player. He's got that mentality that you absolutely love. He would be cheaper on the back end if you trade for him because he's not going to command as much money as David Price, who probably would be looking for something at $150 million in an extension whenever he gets to his next team. And the other factor that's been brought up to me a couple times is, you know what, because Samardzija, who broke into the big leagues the same year as David Price, began his career as a middle reliever, he's thrown about 6,000 fewer pitches in the big leagues than David Price has. So there's less mileage, there's less wear on the tread for Jeff Samardzija than there is for David Price. Karl, if you're in a front office, who would you prefer? And both of these guys, by the way, are eligible for free agency after 2015, so the timeline's going to be the same for either guy. Karl, which guy would you rather have, Samardzija or Price?
Well, let me answer it with a question, because is this for, hey, we're in contention, we want to win the World Series this year, or is this to acquire and then extend out for 3 or 4 years?
It's both. You are acquiring him to improve your chances for this year and also going forward, because you would assume that whatever team commits the prospects that it's going to cost to get Samardzija Price will want to finish it off with a long-term extension.
Right. I would, I'll answer it this way, Buster. And Tim Hudson, we'll go back to Tim Hudson. If either one of those pitchers goes to, and, this is pure speculation, there's been no reported interest from these clubs yet. If either one of those guys went to the Giants, they just would be great. If either one of them went to the Cardinals, they would just be great. There are certain organizations where pitchers seem to thrive. If either one of them went to Texas, I don't know that Samardzija would fare any better than he's faring, slightly better than he's faring in Chicago. If David Price went to Texas, I'm not so sure that the Rangers would take off. If Smarja or Price go to the Dodgers, I'm not so sure that they're still not the dominant pitchers that they are, but that doesn't mean that translates to wins and losses. Just as a basic, who would I rather have on my team for the short term? I'd probably like Price pitching in a World Series game this year more than I would like Smarja pitching, but I do think it has to do with the uniform he's wearing. But I'd say for any length of time, Price to me worries me a little bit because of those number of pitches that you said he's thrown more than Smarja when they both came in. There are easy ways to make cases for both. Clearly being a left-hander, one pitches in the National League. To me, the sort of football mentality that Smarja brings and his development as a pitcher and maybe Price's lack of development as a pitcher with what's left, like what else can he do that's going to make you think he could sort of become Tim Hudson again, and reinvent himself. I think Smarja still has some inventing to do, and I'm not sure that Price does. So I guess the long-winded answer to your question is Smarja, but boy, if the just hypothesized the Giants or the Cardinals went out and got David Price, don't you think they win the World Series? Even the Dodgers, if they go out and get David Price, it's a no-lose proposition to me for October, but I'd rather have Smarja in the long run.
I had an executive say to me the other day that doesn't it feel inevitable that Price is going to wind up with the Dodgers? And by the way, in the fall, they actually saved number 14. They set it aside in case they got Price, so they felt good about their chances. And I don't think there's a team that could be a better match for a particular player in the trade market than the Giants and Jeff Smarja. Because when you look at the Giants' makeup, they've got Lincecum on a 2-year deal, year one. They've got Hudson on a 2-year deal. This is year one. And after 2015, they need somebody to be alongside Madison Bumgarner or Matt Cain. I think Smarja would be perfect there. Justin, if you had a choice of one of these two guys, which guy would you take?
I know strong opinions are always more interesting, but I think this is sort of splitting hairs between two really, really good pitchers. There's part of me that feels like Smarja, and we've sort of alluded to this, is on the ascension, and I think I know there are statistics that back that up, and I feel like David Price is sort of moving in the opposite direction, despite the fact that you look up at every one of these starts and it's 10 strikeouts, 1 walk, 11 strikeouts, 0 walks. But you guys touched on it, 17,650 pitches for David Price, 10,643 pitches for Smarja. That includes the postseason, of course, where Price has pitched and Smarja has not. That's 65% more. And, I'm probably neutral when it comes to who I would rather have for this season. But I'm with Ravi that if I'm investing in the long term, I'd rather invest in Smarja.
We got about 3 minutes left. Justin, give me your next level evaluations. First on Manny Machado. This is from a request on Twitter from Eoin Daly.
Some interesting things here. His hard hit average is basically the same as it was last season, and his line drive rate is actually up overall. But pitchers are using their off speed very effectively against them. He hit 283 against off speed last year. It's 154 right now. His swing and miss is up, and his chase rate is up against those. He's got a little bit of a ground ball problem. He's got 55% of his batted balls on the ground and 23% fly balls compared to last year of a 49 to 31 ratio. So he's not hitting the ball with a lot of authority, and he's hitting too many balls on the ground, and obviously we're seeing him struggle.
What are you seeing in Andrew McCutchen?
Obviously, quite possibly the hottest hitter in baseball right now. He had 4 homers in his first 244 plate appearances, 6 homers in his last 48. He's got 19 hard hit balls in June, 5 more than anybody else in baseball. He's producing a hard hit ball in 50% of his at-bats in June versus right-handed pitchers. He's got 7 hits, 3 of which are homers, and 8 at-bats that have ended on the first pitch. He had 0 homers through May, and he's absolutely crushing fastballs. He had 43% of fastballs, or 43% of the time he put the ball in play on a fastball. It was on the ground. from April through May. It's only 9.5% in June, so he's just as hot as you can be.
15 extra base hits in his last 11 games. Elias sent out a note last night. He's the last Pirate to do that since Ralph Kiner in 1947. And lastly, Albert Pujols, who's going to be on Sunday Night Baseball. What do you have on him?
Yeah, so a little bit of a preview, obviously. Pujols, there was a point in this season where it looked like he might be, quote, back or fully functional. He's been absolutely brutal over the last month plus through May 6th, and this is with 2 strikes. He's really flailing with 2 strikes. He was swinging 55% of the time through May 6th. It's 73% since. His chase rate is way up to 59% since May 7th, when it was 33% before. And he's putting far fewer balls in play with 2 strikes, and obviously he's been a real weight on that lineup over the last month plus.
Now, Karl, you are in Omaha, Nebraska for the College World Series. Vanderbilt, my alma mater, is participating. And I'll just give you a warning right now that if they win this College World Series, I'm going to be insufferable, okay, to the point that I think I'm going to have Josh produce something for this podcast, maybe like a We Are the Champions from Queen or something like that encompasses Vanderbilt's greatness.
I think it'd be really cool because then you could incorporate all of my phenomenal Vanderbilt play-by-play description calls within that We Are the Champions. But I will warn you that their first round game against Louisville is a tough game. Louisville is the only unbeaten team in the postseason. They're 5-0. The last 2 College World Series champions were undefeated. They're the only team this year that comes in 5-0. Your Commodores have lost here in the postseason. So it's a double elimination format. It all starts Saturday, and Vanderbilt would do themselves well to score a couple of early runs because Louisville's got this kid at the back end, Birdie, who was drafted by the Twins in the second round and throws 100. They're 42-0 and leading after 6 innings. So I would strongly urge you and your dreams of Vandy winning a College World Series to get out to an early start. And, here in the midst of the World Cup and the U.S. Open, we look forward to bringing another championship to you, which will culminate in a couple of weeks.
Well, Karl, have fun with that. And, Justin, stay away from the water.
No question about it.
Claudia Williams is the author of the new book, Ted Williams, My Father, a Memoir. And, Claudia, I read your book. Congratulations on doing this. And it really came out of conversations that you had with your mother, correct?
That is correct, yes. My mom suffered a stroke in 2008, and up until that point, I had never even dreamed of writing a book. A couple of people had approached me and said I should tell my story, but it wasn't until probably that pivotal moment where I realized when my mom was diagnosed with dementia and that she was going to slowly forget more and more that I have to identify that as the catalyst to writing this book, and it evolved from there.
You also write about how your father said to you and your brother, John Henry, that when you see something wrong, you need to speak up. And I got a sense that maybe was a little part of this, too, because obviously there's been so much written about your dad and there was so much written about your family. And it felt like in reading this that there were a lot of things that you wanted to get on the record, correct?
Oh, boy, I sure did. My dad made sure he taught both his children that you stand up for what you think is right. Don't be afraid to defend your loved ones. And standards aren't any good unless you live up to them. So it was my time. It was my time to tell my story, to set the record straight, to tell the truth. I hated that my father is portrayed as a bad parent. I hated that my brother was portrayed as, some greedy son that tried to take advantage of his father. This is a very loving family, and any father, son, daughter who reads this book cannot ignore that simple fact.
Tell me about your process of writing, because this is your first book.
Yeah, I tell you what, I wrote this book while I was in nursing school. I don't recommend it. That was very hard to do. But I tell you what, it started off a little bit difficult because you have to think about a lot of memories, which were painful because I missed my family very much, but it just flowed from there, and It was great. The best part about writing this book was rediscovering who my father was and all his life lessons that he taught me. Boy, I tell you what, Buster, I found them all in his way that he played baseball, in the way that he served his country, in the way he was allegiant to the Jimmy Fund and children with leukemia or cancer. It just put everything into perspective.
Yeah, and your situation's unique because, of course, your father's playing career ended long before you were born. And so tell me about how you did some of your research and learning about those things, and maybe a lot of those things were things that you were learning as you became an adult and were spending time with your dad.
Yeah. I have some great stories about meeting Joe DiMaggio and some of the great old-timers. But, a lot of people don't realize that 11 years after my dad hit his last home run, I was born. So by the time I start to develop a relationship, I'm 10, maybe 11. Now we're talking 22 years. But I discovered, I'm just going to grab this one right off the top of my head. The 56-game streak of Joe DiMaggio is phenomenal, and I'd like to rectify a little myth that's out there. He and Joe DiMaggio were great friends. There was no animosity there. There was no tension. It was just good, friendly competition. But as I'm writing this book, I had to do a little bit of research on baseball. Well, what I discover during those 56 games, Joe DiMaggio, fantastic. My dad actually ends up having a higher average than Joe did during those same 56 games. And then I discover that not only did he have a higher average, but his on-base percentage during those same 56 games was higher. So I found out some really cool things about my dad and his playing career that only made me appreciate him more as a baseball player, whereas in the beginning of my life, that may have been third on my list as far as how I perceived my dad,
Tell me about things that you saw in terms of exchanges between your dad and Joe DiMaggio, and where were those?
Oh, my. Well, we went to the induction of the Hall of Fame a couple of times, my brother and I and my dad, and gosh, it's a baseball fan's dream come true to be able to be in the Oda Saga with all the members of the Hall of Fame and all the returning guests and their families. It's amazing. People would probably die to be in that situation, and I was in it a couple of times. And I remember one time where I was sitting on the back porch of the Oda Saga Hotel, and my dad is sitting down with an elderly gentleman, fine-dressed man, tall, thin, and he's talking to them, and John Henry and I walk up, and my dad says, "Kids, this is the greatest player I've ever seen in my life." And he said, "I want you to meet this man. He's my great friend." Doesn't even introduce him because he's just sitting there, doesn't even realize he's just so close to this guy. He fails to represent him as Joe DiMaggio, and I didn't know who he was, so I shake his hand like I'm supposed to, and they are chit-chatting, and Dad's telling him what a great hitter he was. I find out later that that's Joe DiMaggio, right? And the whole time I'm sitting there watching my dad talk about this man, I realize, I'm like, "Dad, you're a pretty good player too." I'm like, why do you feel like you have to raise this person up so high? But that's exactly who my dad was. He was always honorable and talked highly about his fellow player. I had told another great story the other day. I happened to meet Stan Musial at one time at Cooperstown, New York. And I had the privilege and the honor of Stan Musial playing me a song on his harmonica.
When did you become aware that your father was a really big deal?
Well, it had to be probably 1982 at the Old Timers game in Boston. I was 10 years old, and I had never seen my father in a baseball uniform before. I knew somewhere in the back of my mind that he had played baseball, but as far as I was concerned, at 10 years old, all boys played baseball. So Dad, did it for a living, and that was good. But as far as I knew Dad as a phenomenal fisherman. He was that was his call to fame as far as I was concerned. So when we were in that stadium and they start calling out all the players, his teammates, Johnny Pesky, Dom DiMaggio, I was like, I waited when they were announcing Dad's number, and I don't know yet that it's Dad, right? And the crowd just starts to go crazy, and people are standing up and cheering and clapping. By the time Dad's name was finally announced, I can't even see him walk out onto the field. And it was at that moment where my mom picks me up and she hikes me up onto her shoulders, and I look out in the field and she says, "That's your father." And I was like, oh, wow, we've got someone far more than a phenomenal fisherman here.
And you wrote about a situation when you were in grade school when you worked on this, basically what was a science project, and you heard from a classmate that you got an A because you were Ted Williams' daughter. And it was really neat. My son is 9 years old. My daughter's 14. So I can see them at that age with your response. And that statement seemed to have sort of confused you a little bit. And you asked your mom about it, correct?
Yeah, what I learned at that age, and I was still pretty young, probably 11 now or 12, I started to realize that, growing up with a celebrity, and I'm a small example of that. I mean, can you imagine the son of Michael Jordan or the daughter of Madonna? I mean, I realized at a very young age that no matter what I did in life, I was going to be judged, I was going to be prejudged for that matter, and it was going to be very hard to find my own identity. But as difficult as it might have been for the daughter of Ted Williams, can you imagine how it would have been, or how it was for John Henry, the son who wanted to play baseball? God forbid, though, every time he tried, criticized up and down, left and right. And even if he was good, he was never going to be as good as his father.
We're talking with Claudia Williams, the author of Ted Williams, My Father, a memoir. And Claudia, you have a great description of him in your book when he was fishing and his concentration level. What can you tell us about that?
My dad was the most focused, hardworking man I've ever met in my whole life. I have never seen someone approach every single thing that he did so methodically, with so much thought. This was the most cerebral man I've ever met. And if you want to see a beautiful example of that, all you have to do is pick up the book, The Science of Hitting. This guy, back in 1971, writes to the finest detail on how to hit a baseball that would compare today with some of the highest technology. But he did it way back then. He just broke it down so anybody could understand it. And I loved watching him work at something. If it wasn't fishing, it was tying a fly. Have you ever seen a fly? They're tiny. They're about the size of a quarter. And my dad would make them, and they looked like little pieces of art. That's how intricate and detailed to attention my dad could get. Every single pitcher he watched, he knew exactly what they were going to throw. If it was 3-2, I guarantee you, he knew what that pitcher was going to throw.
And when he was actually fishing, you describe how he watched the line as it quivers in the water.
Yeah, well, he knew exactly where the fly landed. He could, but he could throw a fly 90 feet and drop it and cast it into a coffee can. Okay? That's how precise this man was. Did he have good vision? Yes. But you know what? He says it doesn't matter how much talent you have. If you don't work your butt off, you're not going to do anything with it.
Now, he clearly was fascinated by excellence. I covered the Padres in 93 and 94, and I love to hear Tony Gwynn's version of how your father would basically break him down on what do you see. Tell me about what you're doing. But that not only extended in baseball, it also was in fly fishing. And you have an anecdote in there about him talking with Tom Brokaw. Can you relate that?
Oh, my God, that was a great moment. We went to go see the shuttle launch of John Glenn. And before the launch, he had an interview with Tom Brokaw. He goes up, starts talking away with him, and Tom Brokaw pulls out a handful of flies that he made. He's a big-time fisherman. And Dad just lights right up, starts talking to him, and they start talking fishing. And, of course, Dad wants to see how Tom Brokaw fly casts. And right there, and it was as if we forgot why we're at the launch pad. Right there in front of everybody, Dad starts breaking down Tom Brokaw's cast. He had a weak cast. He wasn't pulling the line back far enough, letting the weight of the line carry the fly, I should say. And it was pretty funny. It was certainly one of the best memories I have.
I was not aware until I read your book about your father's relationship with John Glenn, the former astronaut. He went on, of course, to become a U.S. Senator. Can you tell that story?
Sure. Daddy met John Glenn when he was flying in Korea. He actually was his wingman. And do you know what the wingman is, what his job is?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, the wingman. I mean, Daddy would protect John Glenn wherever he was flying. Dad flew back because pilots oftentimes can't see very well behind them. So that was Dad's responsibility. And John Glenn is quoted as saying that Dad was one of the best pilots he had ever seen. So they forged a friendship during the Korean War, and throughout their whole lives they stayed friends. And when it came time for John Glenn to go back up in space, the two of them got together and they started talking, and the stories that they shared is probably one of the reasons why we became so interested, even more interested than we already were, in science, because a lot of people don't realize this, but they did an extensive amount of research and tests on John Glenn when he went up in space, and it was all related to aging and reversing the age process. Now think about that. That's huge. And Dad became very, very interested, very intrigued, and he kept on telling John Henry, you get on that World Wide Web of yours, and you look this up. I want to know exactly what's going on with John Glenn. I want to know what they're doing. I want to know everything they're researching.
Now, in reading your book, it's pretty clear a couple things about your dad in terms of his personality. And you mentioned this a number of times, he could be really impatient, and he seems so blunt. Yep. And it seemed like almost for you sort of a learning process of how to anticipate that when you were spending time with him and in your conversations with him. Can you talk about that?
Yes. My dad's second rule of hitting a baseball is proper thinking. And that was one of the neat things that I discovered when I was writing this book. I realized that through my relationship with my dad, I learned how to anticipate the challenges that I would face with him. I got to know my dad as if I were to study an opponent. I knew him so well that I could tell when the tide was about to change, when there was a change in the air where he was going to get upset about something. And quite frankly, maybe it's because I was his daughter, maybe because we had that close of a relationship, I'm not sure. But after a while, his outbursts and his swears and his temper, you know what, Buster? It was just it was like white noise in the background. It wasn't shocking, it wasn't abrasive, it's not like it was offensive. It was just part of who our dad was. And it wasn't hard to accept at all, but it did take some time to get there.
And it seems like he was maybe the most dead honest person that I've ever read about. Yes?
Brutally. The best honesty you can be. I mean, he didn't even know how to be fake, okay? Ted Williams did not know how to be fake. He could certainly be harsh. His delivery sometimes was very intense, but you know what? His message and his words were the most honest and heartfelt. He wore his heart on his sleeve, and you know what? If you didn't like him, then that's okay by him. But he was not going to change his ways. And I love that about my dad. Such a genuine person, okay? Not a fake bone in his body.
Now, there was so much written and said about your family and how you handled your father's body after your death. And my own personal feeling as that played out, and I was reading it, was that it really is your family's business. My mom passed away in 2006, and I, like you, grew up on a farm in Vermont, and my family's old-fashioned, and my stepfather made the coffin for pine boards. I dug the grave for her. But it was clear from reading your book that you were upset about some of the perceptions of your family. What were some of the things that made you upset?
Well, I think more than anything, it was pretty quick how people got so judgmental and critical and during a time which was very, very painful. And this is a moment in everybody's life, family's life, that should remain private. And it should be almost a sanctuary because they're going through some painful moments, such terrible grief. And what I try to do in this story that I wrote, My Truth, is that decision that we made, it's not like we woke up one day and said, you know what, we're all going to get cryonically preserved. No, not at all. It was a journey. It's a transition that happened through life and life's painful experiences that we finally got to that point. And especially since you consider, we didn't grow up with religion, and Dad was such a scientific man. not only will you start to understand after you read this book why we chose it, you might even think there was no other option.
Claudia, I've done a couple of books, and I've told friends about the experience of hearing the UPS truck pull up to my driveway, and a box is dropped on my front doorstep, and it was the first time I held a book in my hand. Tell me about that feeling you got when your book came back to you for the first time.
That's a great question, Buster. I've got to tell you, I still pick up my book and I'll look at it, and I just can't believe it. I see my name on it, and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's wild. I almost feel naked sometimes when I look at it, because my whole heart and my whole soul is in this book, and I'm proud. I tried very hard to honor my family. I'm trying very hard to avenge them and show them, if they're looking down, that I love them and I miss them terribly. And I, just wanted to set the story straight.
Hey, Claudia, thanks for taking the time to do this, and good luck on your book tour.
Thank you very much.
One last thing.
We had Claudia on Thursday night's Baseball Tonight, hosted by Tim Kirkjian, and we were telling Father's Day stories from baseball. And I got to say, I trumped everybody, Josh, because I told the stories about the Ripkens.
Okay.
And this was a classic Ripken family story. When Cal Ripken Jr. and Billy Ripken signed professionally for the first time, the gift that they got from their father, Cal Ripken Sr., who was known as one of the tough guys in baseball, once when he had a blister underneath the toenail, he went and got an electric drill to drill into that, blood spurting out all over the place to relieve the pressure, okay? So that was Cal Ripken Sr. When his sons signed professionally for the first time, he gave each one of them a gift. For Cal Jr. and for Billy, he gave them each a steel protective cup that he had worn when he played during his career, Josh.
Wow. That's quite a gift. Heirloom that'll be treasured forever by the Ripken family, I'm sure.
It was treasured forever. It was like a family heirloom. It was passed down. You got a problem with that?
Not at all. This weekend when I see my dad for Father's Day, I'm going to ask him why he hasn't handed down his jockstrap to me quite yet.
Oh, well, thanks for saying it that way. That's terrible. That's it for today. My thanks to Karl, Ravech, and Justin Havens, and to Claudia Williams and to Josh Macri, who produced this podcast, and he's not cracking on people. Thanks for listening, and have a great weekend, everybody.
Thanks for listening to the Baseball Tonight podcast. If you're playing fantasy baseball, don't forget to listen to the Fantasy Focus podcast. Check out all podcasts at ESPN.com/PodCenter. Baseball Tonight, the podcast.